lendemain pour les élections présidentielles.
The number of people not voting is increasing each time. It's a real scourge.
I don't trust anyone. There isn't one of the candidates who can represent me.
We need to make politics attractive again, to make people believe in democracy.
Hello and welcome to France in Focus. This week we're looking at a key question ahead of this year's presidential election, and that question is to vote or not to vote. As the candidate's hat fills up with names, the race is on to drum up support, but voter apathy is still a major concern. We've been to one Paris suburb with a particularly high abstention rate to meet some of those who say they're adamant they're going nowhere near a polling station this spring.
Pour les élections présidentielles, Fabien Roussel, vous comptez aller voter?
A tough task for the leader of the Communist Party of Aubervilliers. Aurélie Lemeur is on a mission to convince residents here to cast their ballots on the 10th of April.
In each election, we go and campaign, and then we see that the number of people not voting is increasing each time. It's a real scourge, unfortunately. Democracy is suffering. People in working-class districts are disappointed, and they no longer believe in it.
These residents don't trust politicians, accusing them of being detached from reality.
They make big promises, speak nicely, and then it doesn't go anywhere.
I don't trust anyone. There isn't one of the candidates who can represent me, defend my interests.
1 in 2 residents here lives below the poverty line, another factor pushing many to shun the polling booths. At this community outreach centre, staff try to improve the lives of people living in the area. Dimitri, who got a job here after spending 4 years in prison, doesn't see any reason to vote.
Voting for someone who talks BS and then, once they're in power, sits down and forgets everything they've said doesn't really encourage me to go and vote.
While young people may be disillusioned with politics, they remain involved in local life.
We didn't close the association during COVID. The young people in the area did all of the volunteering. They were all saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and I don't see any greater act of solidarity or citizenship than that.
Despite everything, Ali remains convinced of the necessity to vote and tries to convince young people in the area to make their voices heard.
I say to them that unfortunately what you say is true, but if you don't do anything then nothing changes, so it's important to vote.
That message is going increasingly unheard. In last year's regional elections, 65% of those eligible to vote chose not to do so.
Céline Braconnier, you're the director of Sciences Po Saint-Germain-en-Laye and the author of The Democracy of Abstention. Thank you for talking to France 24.
Avec plaisir.
First of all, how would you describe the health of French democracy as we head into this election year?
French democracy isn't doing very well, if you believe the statistics on voter turnout. We've seen very high abstention rates in recent years. That's explained somewhat by the COVID crisis. But it's not just that. Much of abstention is linked to a growing lack of interest among voters in what politicians are offering. This has led over 20 years to successive record rates of abstention in all kinds of elections, except the presidential race, which is still not seeing the record rates of lower turnout. Having said that, it has had a regular fall in turnout since 2007. This alarm bell has not gone unnoticed by the government and by voters.
Do we have a clear idea of the kinds of things that are feeding this voter apathy? Why do so many people here in France apparently not seem to care?
France is affected by voter apathy, though it's not alone in this. Abstention is explained by several factors. Some of those factors concern policy proposals that are not in line with voter expectations. Distrust in institutions is especially high in France compared to neighbouring countries. But it's not just political factors, there are social demographic ones as well. Young voters, for example, vote a lot less than older people do. The working class also vote a lot less, as do people with fewer years in school. Abstention rates are increasing over time. They reflect very high inequalities in voter turnout due to several factors. And this explains why several approaches are needed to counteract voter abstention.
Well, as you were saying, the alarm bell has been raised here in France about abstention, but things are being done, though, to try and buck this trend. We've been looking at 2 new tools that have been created.
Podcaster Léa Chamboncel is recording her show in front of a live audience. The group chat on stage is about the role of women in politics. Another main concern for her is getting young people interested in the coming presidential vote.
Young people are more political in their behavior than their elders. Older people will vote almost because it's a citizen's duty. The young have a way of life. Many, for example, are choosing not to travel by plane for environmental reasons.
Another initiative is an app aimed at getting people to vote, especially young people. These 3 students are checking it out. It asks them to select political policy ideas they agree with or not. The policy proposals are ones being put forward by France's presidential candidates. After saying yes or no to 25 policies, the app tells them which presidential candidates match up with their choices.
First place, Emmanuel Macron. Second, Yannick Jadot. And third, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who apparently agrees with 100% of those proposals.
The app has been created by 2 business school students aged just 22 and 19. They argue everyone's voice needs to be heard, the young included.
The aim is to help all young people to get interested in the election, understand the manifestos better, help them choose. We're neutral, independent.
Their initiative has come in for some criticism, with some people saying it favours certain candidates. Also out there to encourage young French people to vote is A voter, I've voted. It is France's first WhatsApp chat bot, a digital interactive service that tells young people if they are on the electoral roll and how to go about voting. As one of the creators explains, there is a general disconnect with mainstream politics.
Because they feel manipulated by politicians who come to them every 5 years to get their vote. Young people say there's no point in voting. We're telling them, check you're registered to vote, go and vote, and continue the political commitments you make on social media and on the street.
The first round of the presidential election this April will show if the efforts being made to get young people to cast their ballot have worked or not.
Céline Braconnier, some say that voting should be made mandatory as it is in countries like Australia or in Brazil. What's your own view on that?
I think that before making voting mandatory, we have to try other things. We have to reform civic education in schools, we have to reform the way elections are organized so young people can take part much more easily. Compulsory voting is a last chance solution, I'd say, after we've tried other things. It's never a solution to get really enthusiastic about because it means vote is forced, and it creates a vote that is not politically committed. When voting is an obligation, people go to avoid the punishment for not voting without necessarily understanding the political changes proposed or being motivated by those policies. This is not a satisfying solution for democracy. There are a lot of things that can be tried to reconcile French people to representative democracy.
And just quickly, if we look at data from other countries like France's neighbours, is abstention a wider problem, or does France's apathy have a particular French quality?
What is specific to France is that we haven't yet introduced election reforms to make voting easier. When the younger generation don't understand what voting is for, they don't go and vote. Older people continue to vote out of a sense of duty, but that isn't working for young people. So we have to ask, how can we get them interested in voting? We have to talk to them, to defend their concerns, to take charge of their interests, as well as asking what can be done to make voting easier for them. The problem is that young students, when they are at university, are obliged to travel to go and vote in another voting district because they are registered where their parents live. They should be able to vote where they are. We have not, in France, gone as far as doing what's needed to facilitate voting. We won't solve the problem of disenchantment about politics with technical solutions, but they can help boost voter turnout. Such solutions would reduce the gap with neighbouring countries which have done this.
Okay, Céline Braconnier, thank you very much talking to France 24. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for another edition of France in Focus as the nation waits to find out just how many people will turn out to pick their next president. Do stay tuned, more international news coming up.